All right, Rafael. So let's start. We regularly meet at the annual meeting of the International Transport Economics Association. And I think you remember the first time we met, which I don't.
I would say it's 2009 in Denmark. I am confident that it was then. And then the year after, in Valencia, we organized the conference, and it was kind of the kickoff for the formation, for the birth of the association. And you were here, so it must have been the year before.
Yeah, of course. I always like it when I kind of whenever there's a chance to go.
We've spoken so many times that we've lost track.
Right. I mean, whenever there's a chance to travel to Spain, definitely I will go because there are many reasons. The people, the food, and a lot of things, and also and this is kind of bringing us to why we are together today. There are some things when it comes to transport and transport economics. Then there are also the Spanish market has some sort of special features. And this brings us to your contribution. By the way, congratulations for your contribution to the special issue on airline economics of transportation. And your co-authors were?
My co-authors are Pedro. The other transportation colleagues, basically Pedro Cantos, Jose Sempere, and now we have incorporated Alba Ruiz. And yes, we are grateful to the guest editors for having considered our paper. And I have seen that in the special issue, there's several papers that treat environmentally related aspects of aviation. No, there's one by Ovaere and Steph Prost, who also comes to the conference regularly, which he has market-based measures, because he combines fuel taxes, efficiency standards. And there's another paper by Jan Bruckner and co-authors Ken and Nickelsberg. And this is more about airline strategies, right? Because the fuel costs are very important for airlines. And so they try to do something to save
they don't try. They do something. They do
something. And we have a different issue. But in the end, it is all related to environmental
They look at speed. The speed of airlines and how that affects fuel consumption and therefore also the carbon emissions. And for all the viewers who are interested in this, highly recommend it. The podcast is available. I will provide the link down below. And I think it was a great conversation also with John. And I also had the conversation with Xavier Fajeda, who is one of the guest editors you mentioned. And he said that he was very happy with, with all the submissions. So, and I think for good reason. And so let's talk about your paper, because I feel what you have been doing is very relevant from the transport policy perspective, especially also given recent developments in Spain, which is basically the motivation for your study. Maybe you can share a little bit of this, what's happening currently in Spain with respect to transport policy.
We researchers sometimes are blamed for not being realistic, and so very often we read the news, and it was end of 2021, early 2022, some 3-4 years ago, that we read on the Spanish press that there were plans to ban short-haul flights. And then you start reading, and then you find that similar measures are to be implemented maybe in France, that also, for instance, connections between Brussels and Amsterdam, they're more high-speed rail connections, so to save on this short-haul flights. And then we also read that there is a kind of movement in which, I didn't know that, to be honest, that some travelers are kind of ashamed, or which is the Flixcam story, saying that that how is it that you, such a clever people and working on aviation, are you still flying? How is it if you contribute to CO2 emissions, to greenhouse? emissions so much, and that inspired the paper. Yes,
right. And I mentioned before that there are some special the Spanish markets has some special features. Now, I think this is very relevant for your modeling choices. So maybe you can share a little bit about this.
I can. So before I tell you just why we have this modeled, these short half-life bands, these plans, they have if clauses. The main one is there should be a proper alternative, in this case, a high-speed rail alternative. That's one of the ifs. And also that in any case, let's say that connections to other markets, to other destinations, for instance, if I am here in Valencia, I cannot reach the United States with a direct flight. So I will have to stop at Madrid, for instance, and then fly to New York or to Miami. So all that together led us to think of a transportation network. So that's one of the main ingredients which we think is very important. So on the one hand, we would have something like Valencia down here in the east of Spain. Then you have Barcelona up here, and you can reach Madrid, and from then you fly to the States. But of course, between Barcelona and Madrid, and Valencia and Madrid, you can take high-speed rail services, and more importantly, you can also use your private car. So that's the second ingredient. And then, of course, if this is environmentally related, what we put in the model is we want to take into account environmental costs in the simulation. Just we can distinguish between the let's say CO2 and then all external costs associated to each transport mode.
Right. And I think what's interesting is that, this is a very complicated framework that you're looking at. First of all, we know that networks are complicated, even within one mode. This is already complicated. But then you don't stick to one extra mode, like two modes, but even three modes of transport. Now, people may be thinking, oh, wow, what are they doing? Why do they do this? This doesn't make sense. And it's just making things look complicated, and it's not really necessary. What would be your answer to those people?
It does, because the paper has two parts. The viewers will realize that when they take a look at the paper.
Which they will.
There is a first part, which is, let's say, the model, which is a theory part with some results, which give us intuitions of what we expect to happen in the second part, where we simulate what would happen if we eliminate short flights between Barcelona and Madrid, or between Valencia and Madrid. Why do we have these two different cases? Because, and that's answering your question, because between Barcelona and Madrid, it is air and high-speed rail, the two modes that are the closest substitutes. So the competition is stronger among those two. Whereas between Valencia and Madrid, it is air and car. The model distribution for car travel between Valencia and Madrid is 76%, whereas it is only 25% between Barcelona and Madrid. And
this is important. This is important. May I say? Yeah, please. I'm sorry. I should let you talk. You go.
I was going to say that you are right. That yes, because
so
that means that we should have more than just air and high-speed rail. That's on the one hand. And also, as you mentioned a minute ago, if we just look at origin destination and we do not have a transport network, then we may leave important effects out for what would happen for connecting passengers, right? Because that means that high-speed rail and air, they are complementary modes. That's important. And also because associated with the if conditions of banning short-haul flights, countries are, they have these plans, but they are a little bit reluctant to implement them. So maybe they think of, okay, we'll do it just on one leg, on one domestic flight, but not on others.
Right.
And if we have a network, Achim, then maybe you drop short flights between Barcelona and Madrid, but it has an impact on what happens between Valencia and Madrid.
Right. What I wanted to say is actually something else to motivate your three-mode network.
Exactly.
And this is, now you would say, if high-speed rail, because it's about, ultimately it's about environmental policies, right? So especially also greenhouse gas emissions. Now,
it's one measure.
If road and high-speed rail would have been the same environmental impact, then you still doesn't make sense to distinguish them. You just say there is one alternative mode. But of course, that's not the case. And this is why I think this is ultimately what you need in order to motivate such a complicated model structure.
You are right.
Is that it's not only that in reality you observe that on some connections road is more important than high-speed rail and vice versa, but also the environmental impacts are very different. So if this is environmental policy, capturing these different modes is important because for these two reasons. They are relevant, both relevant for passengers depending on the road, but their environmental impacts are very different.
And linking with that comment, what we've seen in many papers that our colleagues have published, they basically look at what happens if one more mode is introduced in competition with existing ones. And in this case, it's the other way around. You take one out of the picture. And if we have a network, there are implications, there are consequences transmitting through the whole network. Yes.
Okay. So what you are saying, basically, let me just, because I think this is, I'm not sure this is 100% clear. So basically what we have now, before what I try to highlight is, that it's a good choice, modeling choice, even though it makes the whole thing much more complicated to look at three modes of transport. Now, what you are saying when you talk about basically our friends and colleagues modeling these kind of issues, they may not necessarily be look at a network like this. They may concentrate on a specific route and then discuss how does this affect the overall welfare performance, environmental performance, basically, or welfare performance ultimately of of transport. But what you are saying is you are looking at a bigger network, which makes things complicated. But that is also for a reason, because the size of the network matters.
Exactly, and we will have three different markets. Let's say the local markets or domestic markets. Then you have international markets, and then you have connecting markets. Right. And as you have just suggested, for a particular case, for a particular route, for a particular link, the connecting market may be, let us say, relatively more important than local markets, or not as important as local markets. That can bring a difference. And because in our story we're talking about the competition between modes, then the degree of product differentiation, the degree of substitution between modes is also important. And so what we do in the first part of the paper is we develop the model, in which, importantly again, because I think I didn't mention this, but if we consider, for instance, Valencia and Madrid, you can have air transport, you can have high-speed rail transport, and you have the private car. So there are three modes that are competing with each other. But if you reach Madrid and you fly to New York, then an individual, a traveler, might be taking the high-speed rail, reaching Madrid, and then connect with a flight. In which case, rail and air, they are complements.
And the same can be true for road, right?
Exactly. And that you can take care of if you work in a network. So we first solve, let's say we characterize the prices, the equilibrium prices, the equilibrium traffics. We do that under some assumptions, of course, and then we do, the very first exercise, let us drop just short flights between Valencia and Madrid, or drop all domestic flights, and see what happens to prices, what happens to traffic.
And I think what's important is when you talk about simulations, you talk about something that is more sophisticated than what I would usually do as numerical simulations, because I just use some parameters that seem convenient for me. But what you're doing is you're really trying to, you're not trying, but what you're doing is basically you have some, you do some parameter calibration. You have some calibrated parameters that are chosen so that they resemble what you basically observe in the real world transport markets in Spain.
In the benchmark case, yes, that's right. But before that, in the theory part, although, you already suggested that it becomes complex. So we make some simplifying assumptions to get some results which provide intuitions for what's going on. So, for instance, we report a couple of results, and they are reported under, let's say, depending on two dimensions. One of them is how important is the connecting market relative to the domestic market. That's one dimension. And the other one, the degree of substitution across modes.
Right, and that matters for the results.
We take that symmetric, because then let's say that comparisons can be drawn. And for instance, first intuition is consider Valencia, Madrid, and then you drop the flight. If you drop the flight now, there is one less mode in competition with high-speed rail.
Yeah.
If competition becomes weaker, high-speed rail price goes up. That's bad news.
And this assumes that the high-speed rail operator has some profit motives or objectives.
Absolutely.
And this is something that I feel that from some conversations that we had is an assumption which doesn't seem to be too awkward, because it is still true that the high-speed rail operator is basically publicly owned, right?
Yes, but we're talking about long-distance passenger markets. And then if we go to the incumbent's webpage, Renfe in Spain, what we will read is those lines are run on commercial grounds. So as you say, it's not that bad to assume that they maximize their profit. But as I was saying, if competition becomes weaker, then the price of high-speed rail goes up.
Yeah.
The thing is that because high-speed rail operates the same on Barcelona, this one goes up, and here it also goes up.
Yeah.
Not that much, but it goes up. That's because of the network.
Yes.
And the second interesting effect we believe is that, of course, there are travelers departing from Valencia, reaching Madrid, but they want to reach the States.
Right.
Therefore, it is important for these guys, it's important the price of the full ticket. What is the strategic reaction of international airlines? They would decrease their prices.
Yeah.
To make connections attractive, which brings us to the relevance of the connecting market relative to the short market or the domestic market. And those are a couple of, on top of that, there is also an increase in car traffic.
Yeah.
So sometimes there is a shift from travelers taking the air transport to high-speed rail, which will happen in Barcelona.
Right.
But if we are thinking of Valencia, many travelers will shift to car. And as you mentioned earlier, car is more pollutant than high-speed rail.
Yes.
If we put everything together, there is no way in which we can figure out what's going to happen in welfare terms or environmental
in general,
and the like.
Right?
And
It's because there are all kinds of different things happening.
And that's why we run the simulation in part number 2.
And the simulation results are quite clear, if I understand correctly. And they are in favor or against the policy?
They are not equivocal. So sometimes you would say yes, sometimes you would say no, but that depends on the standards that authorities define. To begin with,
but if I understand correctly, then the welfare effects of this policy, are they mostly negative or positive?
Our conclusions is that they are typically negative.
Typically negative.
That's our conclusion. Right. But before saying that, just in case, people or viewers, they might be thinking that we jump very easily from theory to the simulation. Yes, you already suggested it, that we take data on traffic, we borrow data on elasticities, degree of substitution across modes. We also get data on costs, operating costs, on the size of environmental costs. And then, because it's a simulation, in order to provide an ex-ante analysis of such measure, we can introduce as many asymmetries as we wish. Because in the theory model, we are interested in closed form solutions, and we can rank what happens to prices and traffics. But in the simulation, we can allow for any asymmetry. But of course, we want to be careful and be as close as possible to reality. For instance, if we drop flights between Barcelona and Madrid, who then fly to the United States, we have to make an assumption on how many of these travelers, former travelers, are connecting travelers. And for that, we've taken a look at figures, traffic, international traffic departing from Madrid, and we have checked that, for instance, more or less 5% of them travel to New York or travel to Miami. Therefore, we take that 5% in the calibration of the utility parameters, then profits, user surplus, blah, blah, blah. Exactly. If you were asking about what are the conclusions, and the conclusions are different depending on whether you drop flights between Barcelona and Madrid or between Valencia and Madrid.
This is basically related to your modeling choices, which are inspired by the real world, and which is that the closest substitutes on one connection is the high-speed rail, and the other one it's more the road.
Exactly. And so if you look at that case, Barcelona-Madrid, as you mentioned, because air and high-speed rail are the closest substitutes, if you drop air, then there is a shift towards the green, to the cleaner mode. That's good news.
So how about consumer surplus?
Users, they are basically worse off.
Almost,
that's what happened.
They should be worse off always, right?
In the Barcelona-Madrid ban, users are worse off. The domestic airline is not happy, of course. The high-speed rail line operator is very happy, of course.
Yeah, the high-speed rail operator is actually benefiting from this, right?
Exactly. Yeah, because because in the end, the same train carries guys who get off in Madrid and others that continue traveling. So in the end, there is a slight increase in connecting traffic, and so they are happy. But users are worse off because they pay high prices. And the good news is that environmental costs, they fall, because this is the good case, let's say. Although, once you consider welfare and subtract environmental costs, it is very likely that these gains in terms of environmental damages do not compensate for the losses in users, etc.
And I think here it is important to also put it into perspective when it comes to European policy, because we're talking about climate here, right? And when it comes to climate, Europe has something which is called the famous emission trading scheme. And what the emission trading scheme does, it caps the total emissions in Europe. And so you would say when you find these positive environmental effects, if you take into account that there is an emission trading scheme and that overall the total emissions do not depend on the mode choice of travelers, basically meaning if transport needs fewer certificates, it means that the certificate price will go down and that the certificates will be used by other sectors, which means that ultimately the environmental effects for the domestic European flights will basically be zero, which means that ultimately actually the positive welfare effects, some of the positive welfare effects which are related to protecting or reducing carbon emissions, actually your model would tend to overestimate those effects. And so, and still the welfare effects are rather negative because there is this third mode of transport. And for some countries, some connections that may be more relevant than others, but, there's, road traffic is in general important, I would say, across Europe. So you couldn't rule out that this could be, that you capture an effect that is not only relevant for, is it Valencia, Madrid, right? But also for other connections.
In this story was, let's say, the good case. But still, this is a partial equilibrium analysis. So we're talking just about transportation. In contrast, in the other route, if we drop short flights between Valencia and Madrid, then, let's say, unexpected things happen, which is that high-speed rail price goes up, weaker competition, but then the international air responds by decreasing international air price quite a lot.
I see.
Altogether, that means that the full price following the ban is lower and there's more connecting passengers.
And the connecting passengers are...
So those guys, coming to your earlier question, Achim, then let's say international passengers or connecting passengers, their surplus goes up.
Right.
However, because there's more traffic, the environmental costs, the environmental damages now go up.
And this is not covered by the emission trading scheme. The international flights, I think, again, this is important to highlight.
Yes.
There is a positive effect in your model, which is sort of reduced by the sheer existence of the emission trading scheme. But there is a negative effect, and this negative effect is actually not covered by the emission trading scheme. So that is the real negative effect. And so overall, there are two sources for overestimating the positive welfare effects, which are still not positive enough in your numerical simulations to basically justify a short-haul ban on flights. And I think something important to just at this stage, maybe we should just tell to the viewers that for us, we are not supporters of the aviation system. We like to study aviation systems. But it's not that we necessarily tell, it should be increasing or decreasing. We just try to understand what are good policies. And if the good policies would involve less aviation or a short-haul ban, so be it. We wouldn't care. But if it is not the case, then, that's the result. And then that's the result that we are conveying basically by publishing a paper or in our podcast right now.
We would like, as you say, to convey sensible assessments of the consequences associated with this and that measure. That's what I think is our purpose.
Right.
And adding to this, in the case of the Valencia-Madrid story, then because this has this undesirable effect in terms of environmental costs, there is also one more lesson to be drawn from the analysis, which is a country may take supposed to be so green, you take this measure, and it happens that it does not work. Not only that, because connecting traffic has increased, you kind of brush, let's say, pollution from the domestic market to the elsewhere.
International.
As you suggested in what we are scholars interested in, this should be taken into account. And definitely we wouldn't say banning short flights is a good measure, is a bad measure. in itself. What I think that we can conclude is maybe there are cases in which it's good, maybe. And in any case, just as suggested by other authors in the special issue, by Steph Prost and Obaide, measures should be taken, along with other measures. And of course, we should kind of be cooperative, let's say countries, and in the example, let's say Europe and the States and the like. That would be advisable, and that would be the one of the main takeaways of the paper. Yes.
Sorry, what you would be saying, for me, the main takeaway would really be that your analysis doesn't really provide a lot of evidence in favor of banning short-haul flights. I think that would be my main takeaway. But now you're saying, I think discussing the international markets, because only in these markets you have like basically countries in a sense working, partnering, if you wish. And what you are saying is because there is this negative effect, what you need is actually that the countries kind of work together in terms of their environmental policies in order to manage those effects that happen in international markets. Is that what you would suggest?
Yes, I think that should not be disregarded. Yes, because in the Barcelona-Madrid, it's true that a domestic measure, let's say, is good in terms of environmental damages.
Yes,
because when we initiated the presentation, the discussion, it depends on what are the standards of governments or policymakers. If they think, if they are more concerned about environmental damages, or whether they are put more weight on user surplus or operator profits. But if we just think of environmental issues, in Barcelona, Madrid, if you drop that, not the rest, only that one, environmental costs go down, and eventually also elsewhere, because there's connecting flights. Connecting traffic does not change much. But for Valencia, Madrid dropping it has undesirable consequences. Yeah, that would bring an answer to your question.
So now we have these two lessons. Banning short-haul flights doesn't seem to be a very good idea. And again, it's not because we are trying to promote aviation industry, but what we are interested in is, as others should also be, in good climate policies. And that's, I think, what this kind of analysis, I think, can contribute to providing insights on how climate policies work. And short-haul ban flights, according to your results, doesn't seem to be working very well. And then, of course, also this international dimension that, climate is a global problem. So what we really want is a global policy, and we have policies that are, reaching beyond or reaching a broad range of different areas. And this is, for instance, CORSIA. This may be a little bit beyond our discussion here. But some people would say, and I think that's maybe a discussion that we should continue in the future. But some people say that CORSIA, it's going in the right direction, but there are still quite a lot of it cannot achieve what we really want to achieve in terms of climate protection goals.
Yeah.
So can you? So now we have
Achim, and that's why we chose that provocative title with a question: should short-haul flight bans be good?
And the answer is likely not.
Likely not. It depends. But take a closer look. Read the paper.
Yes. Yeah, and we hope that maybe we can encourage some. I hope that with this recordings and these podcasts, we can encourage some policymakers to. Yeah, I think motivate them to kind of try to incorporate what we as academics like to do in their decision-making process. I think that would be, if we could achieve that, that would be a big success. And so maybe we can contribute to
we
this.
can encourage our colleagues, because this is let's say a good benchmark to start with. But of course, there are other important
exactly. So this is where I wanted to get at.
Out.
Yeah. So what did you left out? What did you leave out? What's open for further analysis?
For instance, the vertical structure of the industry. We've just had the airlines and high-speed rail operator. And about having the infrastructure managers choosing...
You mean airports,
access fees, airports, and in Spain, this is called ADIF for rail. But yes, they have to pay access fees for using the network. Those are elements that have been left out. Also, when we started our conversation in the video, you said, well, Spain has some characteristics, different from others. One such characteristic is that, well, viewers maybe they have heard of this, but in Spain, also in Italy, some routes in France, the connection between important cities via high-speed rail can now be taken with more than one operator. There is competition in high-speed rail services. That is an element that would also be worth looking at. Why? Because then this increase in the price of train, right? When you drop the flight, that would be mitigated if you have 2 or 3 operators running Valencia, Madrid, right? So all that has been left out for the moment.
And that would be good for consumers, right? Because consumers typically, they don't like to pay the higher prices. So if you incorporate that, so basically what you're saying is that your model would be overestimating perhaps the total effect of the policy on consumers. So you're finding that consumers are sort of suffering from these kind of policies, but maybe less if you take...
It's kind of an upper bound, Achim. Yes, you're right. So if we are, let's say, get closer to reality, then bound should be smaller. Yes, you're right.
Could be a little smaller. But that's something that requires, I think in terms of modeling, I think especially also that would be perhaps more challenging in terms of calibration, right? I think the modeling would be, it's just, okay, so you had oligopolistic duopolistic markets there, and then I think in terms of models, of course, the calculations are not simple, but in terms of implementing the idea into a theoretical framework, that maybe is not so difficult, but getting the numerical simulations, the calibrations right, I think then, of course, would be more challenging again. So, Rafael, thank you very much. I think that was a great discussion, and I think, so keep working on this topic, because you have your results, but the policy discussion is not over.
It is not.
This is an ongoing topic, and we will discuss it for a long time. I think we need to.
We have to keep on working
that you work on this.
We have to keep on working and see if policymakers, they telephone us and take a look at our beautiful papers.
I think the issue. Okay, I tell you what I think here. We cannot only wait for policymakers to call us.
We have
to approach each other.
We have to approach them.
We hope that they will be open, but we also, moving towards them and try to, get in touch with them, try to have some exchange, and hopefully, convince them that what we are doing with our research is something that, maybe not entirely, but that there's always some parts that can be valuable for them in their decision-making process.
You're right. It's been a pleasure, Achim.